Hello, Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Radically Loved Radio. Tessa's with us today, as usual. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. How is everyone? I hope your day is as magical as mine has been. I'm not
Oh,
good
has it been magical?
Yes, it's been a magical day. I just feel so accomplished and like the stars are aligning and I'm in a good mood.
Oh, tell me everything.
Oh, well, I did something so terrifying and thrilling all at once. I submitted an article to be published in a magazine. First time I've done that. And gosh, you guys, I have been wanting to, Rosie, you know this. I've been
Yes,
talking about being a writer since I was a wee one.
you are a writer.
Yes. And now, I am a published author.
She's a published writer and she's still trying to say, oh, I'm trying.
I know
Whatever.
it's silly.
Continue.
Anyways, I submitted an article to be published in a magazine, and that felt so good, thrilling and terrifying. And it's sunny and it's like 70 degrees. And I went for a run and,
Yes.
all the things that I just love. I did
Yes.
today.
Yeah. No, I love that. And on that note, we completed the 75 days of wellness.
Yes. Mm,
Yes. So we have our last meeting next week. For those of you who want to join, you can still go on my website, and I believe you can register for the Zoom session there. And yeah, 75 days of wow. This makes me really happy. I too have had a pretty great week, and I'm having a great day. It's so funny how those things that we know to do to make us feel good, and we can sometimes take them for granted, and when we don't do them, we definitely feel the ramifications of not doing them.
yeah.
So like when, oh my god, you guys, I'm sorry, it's the dog. Look, can you
Oh,
guys see her?
Jackie,
Look at
little
her.
fuzzy doggy.
She is just wild, a wild little dog. But anyway, yeah, like going for a run, doing my meditation, reading my reflection, my contemplations in the morning, all of those things that just make me start off my day on a good note. It's just so important for me to do it every day, and it doesn't take a lot. I mean, it just takes doing it, you know.
Mm,
And yeah, I've also had a really great week. I feel like every week for the last couple of weeks it's been like trying to just reframe negative things that have happened or something, especially after last week. But I feel like, yeah, this week's really good. Springtime is here, the sun is
mm,
shining, and things are just feeling really, really great. Um, one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, with especially with today's guest, we have Lodro Rinzler on the show. And I've been actually wanting to get him on the show for a very long time. And we actually connected via email. He is a best-selling author. He's a longtime Buddhist meditator. He's a teacher. He's the co-founder of Mindful Meditation Studios in New York City, and he has a new book called "Take Back Your Mind: Buddhist Advice for Anxious Times." And I enjoyed it so much. Obviously, you know that I've suffered from like debilitating panic attacks since I was a teenager.
mm,
And after the incident that happened last week, it kind of put me into a little bit of a spin. Those of you who don't know, we had a little bit of an incident with the little pup. She's fine. Everybody's fine. Everybody's getting along. Um, and but it just put me into a state of panic, and it took a couple of days for me to regulate. But it really showed me how sort of fragile and how, yeah, like how sensitive we are. And it
mm,
doesn't matter how much meditation you do, it doesn't matter how many tools you have in your toolbox. If something's going to affect you, it's going to affect you. And it's still a conscious choice to choose a different path, to choose a different reaction.
mhm.
And that takes practice. It takes practice to be able to get into that space to choose something different. And so I'm curious for you, especially after, listening to Terry's interview last week, and just with that specific topic. I'm going to try this again, you guys. So, as I was saying, yeah, I'm just curious to hear what have been your ways of managing stress and anxiety. And I know we talked about it last week, and this is a topic that often comes up, but I'm curious if there's any big lesson that you've learned regarding your own reactivity.
Yeah. Actually, as I was listening to the episode with Lodro, um, I have forgot that I have all these tools, and what the work is for me is it's called emotional hygiene. And so just like we take a shower and we clean our bodies, that's one way that we practice hygiene, right? Good hygiene. But there's also this other school of thought called emotional hygiene. And what there's a lot of different tools within this school of thought, but the one that I find myself coming back to over and over again is these 12 needs. Like the idea is that we all have these 12 inherent needs as human beings. And if any one of them is not being met at one point in time, we can feel anxious, stressed out, off balance. So the first thing to do is to check in with those 12 needs. I'm probably going to forget one, but they're basic, like breathing, right? We all need to breathe. So how's your breathing? Are you hydrated? Are you thirsty? How's your temperature? Like, can you regulate are your hands cold? Are your feet cold? Do you need to add an extra layer or take one off? And then there's like a few in the realm of love, connection, relationship, touch. And even if you don't have the ability, like right now, touch is kind of a hard one, right? But even if you don't have the ability to reach out and touch someone else, just even putting your hands on your heart. And we've done that before, but
Yeah.
so these are all like simple things that we all have access to, but they become, I think we just forget, like, we just forget that we have these tools. So that's one thing I love to practice in these times. And then another practice I have is to, if I can remember, like before I go down that spiral of anxiety and stress and like all the what ifs, if I can remember to just sit for a minute and close my eyes and think about all the different ways I can describe what I'm hearing. So, as many adjectives as you can come up with your eyes closed for sound, right? Like there's a soft hum. There's my little kitty who's pitter pattering around. And it's a really good practice to just put you, like Lodro talks about being in the present state. That is a practice that will very much put you in your present state of being because you're just paying attention to what's around you in that moment right now. So those are a couple of
Yes.
things that come to
Oh,
mind.
I love that so much and such great reminders to do. And I hope that this is serving, especially those of you who perhaps are like me and have that really deep groove in your neurological pathway to go directly towards panic and anxiety, to understand that there are other ways to mitigate that. So,
Mhm.
today's episode, we're going to discover how to use gadgets and social media mindfully. So I love that we we have that conversation and we talk about that. Lodro is going to talk about some techniques to help support you with facing anxiety and coping with uncertainties. And one of the things that I loved in our conversation was just hearing his completely relatable approach to things. I mean, he's just such a sweet and loving person, and that really comes through. Um, Mindfulness to me has been a lifelong study. I've been studying mindfulness since I was 13 years old, and not that I was practicing when I was 13. But just I've been familiar with these methodologies, and
Mhm.
I love the fact that he's dedicated his entire life to teaching this to all of his students and to his community. So, with
Mhm.
that being said, we're so happy to be here with all of you. Oh, and then just a quick hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Radically Loved Radio. I'm joined by a very special guest today, somebody that I've actually been wanting to talk to for a long time. And I'm so grateful that the stars finally aligned for us. Lodro Rinzler, welcome to the show. Did I say your name right? Lodro.
Yeah, yeah, you did. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Uh,
The fandom is reciprocal, so it's great to be here.
well, that makes me so happy. You have a new book, and I don't know well, we kind of talked a little bit before we started to record, but um, the name of your new book is called Take Back Your Mind. And you know that I've struggled with anxiety. I mean, really, most of my entire life, and especially last year, when I thought after all of the years of practice and being in the world of wellness and all the tools and being a teacher and being I'm going to do air quotes, like a leader in the space, I still had so much anxiety last year. And I really was just surprised at the level of um, just the heaviness of what I felt last year. And so when I was reading your book, reading about it and the things that you teach and your experience, your life, and I was like, wow, this is something that we need right now so bad. I need it, really, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate your vulnerability in saying that. And I do the same thing in the book where it's like, hey, I've struggled with anxiety most of my life. I started meditating when I was a kid, but that didn't mean that like there haven't been major stressors in my life, major times where things have fallen apart, and all sorts of things that throw us for a loop. And I guess, and I'd be curious to hear about your experience around this, but for me, it's really been, what do I do when things fall apart? What do I do when, it hits the fan and there's a major stressor, there's a major move, a major financial thing, a major whatever it is for any of us. And of course, right now we're in the middle of this pandemic, which is just, it's the first time I can really imagine that we have had such an extended period of collective uncertainty. And we just don't do well with uncertainty. It produces anxiety, it produces stress. How do we work with our mind during that? So I think, the reason why now for this book is really we're all working with anxiety already. Can we sort of support each other? And what you just said is so, I think it's brave and it's vulnerable and it's wonderful because in my experience, we don't talk about anxiety. We all have situations where we are prone to anxiety and no one talks about it. Why? Let's put it out in the open. Let's like support one another in this, hence the book.
Yes. And you know what I found that more people, even though I wish that, yes, more people would talk about, especially in the world of wellness, right? More people would just be more open. I mean, we practice because we forget, right? I mean, it's the whole reason behind why we have to continue to do what we do. But I'm curious for you in working with people, especially last year, what are the main things that you were noticing about our um I'm going to call it dysfunction because I feel like it is a dysfunction, especially when we are in a state of constant input. We're constantly putting things in, taking in information, being on social media, watching the news, just being so bombarded with external things, that we create this uncertainty and heaviness. Like, what was your experience personally, and what did you notice was a big factor in all of that?
Yeah. Personally, I had sort of a bizarre experience where I was like, oh, uncertainty. I know how to work with that at this point. It was sort of like, oh, a long, prolonged period of time where I don't know what's happening. Okay. But it was really interesting working with meditation students. There's sort of two camps. One camp was, I don't know how I'd be able to navigate this if I didn't have the stability of my meditation practice of really, and the book itself, Take Back Your Mind, it has tips, is short little techniques, there's all sorts of things, but there's a heavy emphasis on, mindfulness practice as a way to notice the anxiety producing thoughts that come up and not chase after them, to acknowledge them and come back to the present moment, particularly the breath, that soothing, stabilizing influence we all have. Anyone who's listening to this right now is breathing, like we all have it. So how much could we sort of acknowledge when we get hooked by stress and anxiety, unhook ourselves, come back? Could we train the mind to do it, which is essentially what meditation is? And then the other camp was, it was actually very funny because, the first early weeks, there were all these meditation students be like, how long do you think this is going to go on for? Because like somehow I was going to become like Fauci, like I was just going to know,
Yes.
well, from my experience, as meditation,
Yes.
3 weeks. But it became a really good thing for us because we could then have a conversation around like, well, I don't know, you don't know. Could we start to get comfortable with the not knowing? Because there's going to be so many parts of our life where we don't know.
Ugh.
Someone calls you out of the blue and says, I need to talk to you. these days it's like such a scary thing to see. Oh my gosh, what do we have to talk about? Did I say something? Did I do something?
Mhm.
It might just be like, oh, we haven't caught up in a while. In our mind, though, we could say it's a very minor stressor, but like we could spin out all sorts of stories and lock ourselves in the point of pain and anxiety for days leading up to it. What if they say this? What if I say that? And then we talk to them and say, I just want to catch up. It pops in an instant, but that was so much wasted mental energy that could have gone into creativity, could have gone into connection with friends and family. There's any number of things. So it feels horrible in the midst of a pandemic to be like, this is an epidemic, but it is.
Yeah.
Like we all have this monkey on our back called anxiety, and we need to actually learn tools to unhook ourselves from those stories long enough to enjoy our life.
Yeah. I mean, you're basically telling us why you called your book Take Take Back Your Mind because that's sort of what happens. You've just spoke to all of the reasons and all of the things that take our mind away. One of the things that I found fascinating last year was how, because you're in that state of uncertainty, and even though it's familiar for me, what's most familiar is uh change. I'm like, oh, change is familiar. Impermanence, this is all none of this is going to last long. It's going to, it's bad now, it's going to be better at some point, and then that's not going to last, and then it's going to be bad again, so I can deal with that, but it's still being in the valley of, but is it like, is it going to be better? Is it not going to be better? And really allowing everything around us to corroborate that uncertainty. What I was going to say is that I found myself perpetuating that by watching the news and being on social media and getting wrapped up in all of the hype and all the things that were going on, the civil unrest, like all of the things that were happening were just perpetuating that feeling. And I feel like unless you have the tools, how do you recognize that? How do you recognize that you're doing that so that you can pull yourself out of it? Right.
Yeah, I'm with you. And most people, I think this is part of why this has been such a hard time for them, because we could completely deplete our mental and emotional batteries
Mm.
without even knowing it. And it's like, why? Well, maybe I guess it's because all I've done is look at CNN all day and not actually gotten my work done. I was stressed out about work. And, it's like we could
Yeah.
reason our way there. But one of the things I find really helpful, and this is, again, me personally, and then I included this in the book as well, is after the 50th time that we're playing out the same sort of story,
Mm-hmm.
we could ask ourselves, it's essentially the same question, but the version I find, there's two questions. One that I find very helpful is this helpful? I want to be helpful in this lifetime, right? That's a goal of mine. So is this helpful? No, actually, maybe like early on it was helpful, but like at this point, going back to the previous example of, oh, I want to talk to you, like this isn't helpful. It's not based in reality. And then just by becoming gently inquisitive, I can unhook myself. The second question would be, is this useful? Same thing, really. Because maybe at some point we might say, well, rent's coming due. I need to figure out what I need, how I'm going to pay rent. That's
Mm.
useful the first 1, 2 times that we're thinking about it. After the 50th time, we're playing out the conversation with our landlord in our head, no longer useful. So becoming gently inquisitive with our own mind can also be really helpful to unhook us from those stories.
Yeah. How do we discern that? What a great example. I mean, truly, it's to get you to a place of disengaging, but then how do you not escape into, okay, well, what am I going to do? And now the landlord's asking, like, he's probably going to say no, I need to pay now, or I'm going to get evicted, and I'm going to be evicted in 30 days. What am I going to do with my life? What am I?
Yeah, I do. It's very funny. I've been teaching meditation at this point 20 years. And with so many of the meditation students that I have, particularly when it comes to like a work thing or a financial
Yeah.
thing, well, this person hasn't responded to my email. And you could spin it out. This is actually a version of something I call a thought party, where it's like we try and create as many thoughts as possible, and at some point it bursts.
Yes.
So it was like, okay, what happens if this person, well, if this, I can't finish my project if they don't email me back? What happens if you don't finish the project? Then I get a bad review. What happens if I get a bad review? Well, after a few bad reviews, I might get fired. What happens if you get fired? Then I never get a job again because I got fired. And then I'm living in a box down by the street. It's always like ends with them like living in a box somewhere. And and it can be simple as someone didn't respond to my email. That's how anxiety works. It's not helpful for us. So at some point we almost want it's not always a great technique, but if we're working with someone like that, it can be really helpful to like make it really, really big, and at some point have it pop. We realize reality isn't actually what is in our mind. The what if thinking is not helpful, it's not useful. And we need to like allow ourselves to come back into the present moment. When we're in the present moment, what do we experience? The art on the wall is beautiful. I can just rest and appreciate it for a moment. The flowers smell good. I mean, it's such a cliche, it's to stop and smell the roses, but we don't often spend any time appreciating the details of our life.
Mm.
So allowing ourselves, it's like a two-step process. One, we unhook ourselves from the story so we can come into the present moment. Two, is there something about this moment that I can enjoy?
Yeah. What are some techniques that help us disengage from, I love that you called it a thought party. So I like that technique. So just continue to inquire until you make it, until you can't
Completely
answer the question.
outside of reality. Yeah, totally.
Okay. And it's so true as you're saying that, and I'm following along. Ultimately, it's okay, the big bad wolf is that I'm gonna end up, on the side of the street somewhere, and you know, and I forget, okay, well, that will never happen. I've got so many other ways that I can figure this out. It I'm comparing it to so many things. We can compare that same methodology to our career, to relationships. Actually, that's one of the things. I'm sorry, I'm like jumping all over the place. I have so many questions. Actually, I want to talk to you about relationships and how this pertains to that thought process, because I feel like if you have two people that are in that same uh, mental downward spiral, it makes it worse as opposed to just having one person or having like an anchor point or having a support system. So, how important is it to have people in your life to support you in coming back to yourself?
Yeah. I'm someone who, for the majority of their single life, was constantly like, they haven't responded to my text, and that means that they're done with me, and the whole thing, like I, for all of the safeguards of meditation practice and all that, I was just this one arena. Like I would be fine. I could work with my work anxiety, I could work with my family anxiety. Why haven't they texted me back? Would somehow get me to the point that again, it became ludicrous, and I had to work on it, and I realized it, and you know, um, at this point, my wife and I have been together 6 years, 7 years. Oh God, now I'm on the record not knowing. And
Uh-oh.
it's okay.
I'm
I
going to
think it's
tag her in this. I'm going to tag her.
yep, exactly. Um, but I know that one so strongly. And it's really, it can be quite crippling of like, as you said, even if particularly if there's two people, but even if there's one person that's just so there's such a lack of ease in their own being that they are constantly projecting the what ifs. Like, what if they don't get back to me? What if they're not as into me as I am into them? What if we never see each other again? What if they've ghosted me? Dot dot dot. And I think it's really, there are alluring storylines, particularly for those of us who have gone down that rabbit hole before, where we have been ghosted in the past, where someone hasn't gotten back to us, or whatever our version of it may be. They're not as into us as we are into them. And I guess leave it to the meditation teacher to keep bringing it back to that topic. But there's something baked into even just the most basic breath practices where we're just resting with ourselves as we are. And in Tibetan, there's this wonderful word for meditation, which is gom, G-O-M. It can be translated as meditation, but it can also be translated as familiarization or become familiar with. The idea that this whole process of meditation is us becoming familiar with all of who we are. And if you met a new friend and you started hanging out regularly and getting to know them, at some point you'd be like, I like this person, I like this friend. And maybe months, years pass, you look over your shoulder, I love this friend because we spent so much time getting to know them and embracing them for who they are. Meditation's us doing that with ourselves. We're sitting there on a seat, maybe a meditation cushion, maybe a chair, 10 minutes a day. We're just spending time with ourselves, getting to know ourselves. It's not so that we're leveling up and becoming someone new. We're just getting to know and accept ourselves. So 10 minutes a day, weeks pass, we say, oh, I like myself a little bit better. I'm kinder to myself. Months pass, we love ourselves more. And there's less that feeling of, oh, I need to go find love out there, because there's actual love right here. Like I actually have love and I have access to love. To answer your question more directly, of course, it's wonderful that there's people that can mirror that love back, but it's a little bit less of the Jerry Maguire, you complete me thing, and more of like, I'm here with love and you're mirroring your love back. And it just feels like we're both coming from a place of wholeness. That's a really profound thing if we can get there. And I think that's part of what, actually, last thing I'll say about this is when, meditation class, my wife actually was leading a meditation class 5 years ago, something like that. And we were running this challenge. You come 30 days in a row to these meditation classes, you get your next month membership half off. And we would always say, like, okay, enough of us sitting in the front of the room as meditation teachers telling you why you want to meditate. You tell us what has happened. Anyone here finishing up their time? This guy's like, I've been meditating for 30 days. Great. Why should anyone meditate? He says, at the age of 55, it's actually the first time in my life that I really think I understand how to love myself.
Mm.
When she told me that, I almost cried. I mean, it's like we go through our life thinking so poorly about ourselves. This is actually in the book as well. From an early age, society whispers in our ear and says, actually, you're not good enough. What you really need is a better education. Oh, you're doing all this work. Who said you could do this work? You need a better career. You need a better mentor. You need a better spouse, eye product, house, whatever. Like, we name it. And we are constantly trying to level up for that reason, as opposed to saying, actually, maybe basically, wholly, I'm good, okay, as is. And this is a fundamental belief in, I was raised Buddhist, and people ask, like, oh, what was it like growing up in a Buddhist household? The key thing that really stood out to me is that I wasn't raised with the idea that I was originally messed up and I needed fixing. I was
Mm.
raised with the idea that I'm basically whole good as is. And yes, then as is now, I will make mistakes, I will get confused, and I will act from a place that is not in touch with that goodness. But by and large, year over year, having a deeper relationship with that means that the mistakes get smaller, means that the confusion gets less, and I'm more able to live through that lens. So I think that's huge, that if we could actually start to have a relationship with ourselves where we're like, maybe I'm not basically messed up, maybe I'm basically okay and good.
Mm. Oh, that's so nice. I mean, to be able to go to that place, it's so encouraging to know that that's a possibility for us to go into a state of wholeness when we are in our meditation practice. As you were saying that, I kept thinking, of all the ways that we uh affirm being fragmented with our choices or the things, oh, when I get the house, then I'll be successful. Or when I get the girlfriend or when I get the boyfriend, then I'll be complete. Or when we're trying to find happiness in our next purchase or in our next decision because we feel like we won't be enough until, or we won't feel complete until we're as sitting and being in that state. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about my meditation practice. And I guess been doing it for so long now that it's not something that I think about. I think if I don't sit and do my practice in the morning, I don't feel, I've done it for so long now. I don't actually know who I would be if I didn't do it. But I don't think about it as an opportunity to just, yeah, feel the wholeness of myself. I look at it as more, this is an opportunity for me to connect with my breath and to connect with everything else, right? I see it as a way of just re-entering back into this plane. But I love what you're saying about taking it as an opportunity to feel our wholeness, because I mean, truly, that's exactly what it is taking time to spend with ourselves. We uh, uh, spend so much time giving it to everything else, everyone else. And those moments during the day where we're mindlessly scrolling through social media or watching that next, CNN story, because they hook you in. They're wanting you to keep watching, and it's like, oh, and next this and next this, and it's just like, oh, oh, okay, now what? Oh no, something's going on. It's like, okay, disconnect, turn it off, bring your attention back to you. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier that I use for myself, and perhaps this is useful to anybody out there who is the same, my quickest barometer to how something is affecting me is if I'm breathing or not breathing, right? It's like if I'm watching the news and I'm like holding my breath and I'm feeling that tension, okay, turn it off, walk outside, do something to shake everything back up and get yourself back into a focused state. Because if you continue, and oftentimes maybe people out there can relate, but I'm watching television while I have my phone in my hand, and I'm doing, it's the multi just sensory overload, right?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And obviously there's interesting stuff coming out now around how these devices and social media and all of it and the news cycle have been designed to keep us, keep our attention. It's an attention economy, and they're trying to get as much as they can. It's really hard. There's actually a chapter in here as well around social media and like just how do we set boundaries around these things?
Tell
And it has
us.
to be a
Tell
conscious thing. Yeah. So it's, it's the thing when you write a book and then it comes out so much longer later that you're like, oh, what did I recommend about social media? But there's a sense of intentionality. Um, it's like actually knowing. It's actually a threefold logic that I employ for a lot of different things. So maybe it's applicable to other things as well. But there's our intention, there's our activity, and then there's the fruition of how we feel after. So if I'm going into a long work day, I might set the intention that I am not going to do social media until the end of that day, at which point I'm going to give myself, half hour to catch up and see what friends have been doing, etc. There's a sense of intentionality. Like I'm going to it for a reason. I want to see what my friends are doing. My friend got married recently. I want to see the photos. Great. It's different than what we do, which is an unconscious intention. We're frustrated with something that's on our workload. We open another tab. We open another tab and we keep going. And then we never get work done. And then we're feeling overwhelmed because we never got our work done, etc. So having a sense of, okay, maybe it's not, I push it to the end of the workday, but I'm going to let myself do this for 5 minutes. And then at the end of the 5 minutes, I look at the timer and I come back and I go back to work. Some version of intentionality. And then there's the activity. Do we just show up and be present for the activity? We don't sit there and say, I'm going to feel guilty because I'm doing it. It's like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to, if my intention is to go look at my friend's photos, I'm just going to go look at my friend's photos and see how their wedding was, as opposed to mindlessly scrolling. So to be as present as possible as we engage in these things. And then the fruition is, how do we feel after? If we actually committed to those things and followed through, we might feel refreshed. We might feel uplifted. We just connected with a friend. If we just ended up, our intention went out the window, we've been here for a half hour, we're behind it, we feel not so good. Learning curve, right? Again, we make mistakes as human beings, and then we continue to refine and say, well, I don't want to do that mistake again. I want to be more intentional. So I think that sort of threefold process of intention, activity, and fruition, how we feel after, might be good, not just for social media, but for a lot of the things we do, including, CNN and all the rest that you just mentioned. The nonstop cycle is very hard to break, but setting that sense of intentionality can be helpful.
Yeah, I was writing that down because I think it's such a great way to, like, such a great rule. And I think the first thing I was thinking about as, by the way, I love how when we're trying to be present and as you're saying something, I'm like, oh, my mind, I have another question. I try really hard to practice active listening. So that's why sometimes I have to write things down when I'm interviewing somebody or somebody's talking, because it allows me to focus. But then you're like, how do I relate to this? And all I think is having that intentionality. I've had that intentionality going on social media, but then something comes up. It's like the first thing, and then it takes you down this little rabbit hole. And, then I'm like, okay, I was going to Instagram because somebody sent me their email and I wanted to email them. So I go on there and then it's like somebody's picture, right? There's a video, and now I'm watching a reel, and now it's taking me to another reel. And it's just like, okay, one of the ways that I mitigate that is I mute a lot of distracting accounts, that are in my feed. It's what helps me keep just my focus on. And in the morning, whenever I do social media, I usually just do it in the morning, between the hours of like 10 and 11. And, I might post something, I might kind of tool around a little bit, but then that's it. I won't go back on. I might check it one more time in the evening or do an Instagram story or something, and then that's it. And when I can set those boundaries, I feel a lot better about being on there, because it's so hard to, not get sucked into that current, right?
100%. And I appreciate that you have this like, oh, this is the time within which I allow myself to do it. And I guess there's an element here that we're talking about, which is discipline. So there's two elements here that I talk about in the book. One is discernment. The more we get to know ourselves in meditation or just in general, the more we start to say, oh, these are aspects of my life I want to cultivate more of, and these are ones I want to cut out. And then the discipline is not sort of like I'm going to discipline you, I'm the headmaster sort of thing. It's a sense of like personal moral discipline of like, I know what would actually help me feel uplifted, and I know what makes me feel drained. I need to follow through on that. And the more we listen to that, the more we actually feel like, oh, this is a pretty meaningful, joyful life. And when we just let it go by the wayside, and we're like, I'll just binge watch Netflix until it's done 2 a.m. Lo and behold, we don't feel so good the next day. So we learn. Again, it's this learning process along the way. And that's sort of the beautiful thing as humans, that we can continue to evolve. We can continue to change from who we were and force better habits than we have in the past.
Yeah, so true. One of the other questions I had for you is being able, having had the opportunity to grow up in a Buddhist household, like in my mind, what a dream, right? I'm like, oh, this is how do you have any issues with anything if you grow up in an environment like that? It's like you have all the tools, you have a good foundation. So what are, some of the things that you did find yourself struggling with as you got older?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like there was a part around this where back then, um, meditation was not considered cool. It was not considered trendy. It was totally weird. A lot of misconceptions about it. And I like to joke that's not the only reason I was pushed into lockers growing up, but it did not help that I meditated. So, I think we're seeing the sort of, it is a little bit bizarre that we're all into meditation now. I love it, but
Yes.
it's as bizarre as like if someone was like, we really want to interview you about X-Men comics.
I
It's
love
like,
X-Men.
okay, we'll have a whole other episode devoted to that.
Perfect.
Good. Um, so, uh, but I do think that there was a lot that I didn't learn. I mean, this is a little bit too out there, maybe as an answer, but like, there's a lot that I needed to learn as like a man, and a
Mm.
lot of things that we now look at in terms of toxic masculinity, in terms of like, I'm a white-bodied cisgender man, like the whole patriarchal thing, and there's a lot of many religious traditions come from patriarchal societies, and these things aren't openly discussed. And it was actually learning outside of Buddhism. It's my own anti-racism training, my own, sort of trainings that I would engage in, and teachers that I would have to seek out and study that were sometimes outside of Buddhism, that would then inform my worldview and make me a better person and a better teacher.
Mm.
Um, so it's a little bit off topic, but also sort of like, I think for me, it's always like, where can I learn more? And what do I need to do to sort of like, yes, I was very lucky to be raised in a Buddhist household that emphasized like, I'm basically good as is. And there's also a lot of like things that I'm blind to that I have to
Mm.
continuously lift up the veils, including the veil of anxiety. Like that's one of the
Yes.
ways I talk about it. It's like, there were so many blind spots around anxiety that I wasn't even looking at, because I was raised in a particular household, that it was my parents, even though they became Buddhist, they were both Jewish, and their parents had survived or not, their family members had not survived, in some cases, the Holocaust. There's a lot of sort of anxiety around big societal issues that I never thought would actually become part in our current society, but now I'm seeing people with Camp Auschwitz sweatshirts at the White House or at the Capitol. So it's sort of like, there's a lot of stuff like that sort of, I think, societally and then also generationally got passed down in terms of anxiety for me. And I'm still wiping away at some of these
Yeah.
obscurations. I'm going to keep wiping away. And that's just the work that I'm trying to do as a person. So
Oh,
it's a longer answer than you might have wanted, but that's
yeah,
just
no.
one of the things I'm thinking about these days.
It's so great. I'd love to have you on again. We can talk about that ancestral generational anxiety that is, I believe, passed down, energetically or however you want to see it, because I feel it's such a fascinating place. I don't know if you've looked much into the world of epigenetics. I mean, some people think that it's totally, woo woo, and some people are really into it. I'm definitely more of the scientific brain type, but I also am, I do see a lot of correlations, and I do believe that some of that stuff is quite possible. And yeah, I'd be curious to hear how mindfulness plays a role in that. So that's our next
That'll
episode.
be
That'll be
excellent.
fun. Yeah, and then we can talk about X. I used to collect Wolverine comics. Are you kidding?
Yeah, great.
Obsessed. Obsessed. Okay, so I am so excited. I'm just wanting to be respectful of our time here. The book is called Take Back Your Mind. And I recommend that everybody out there who's ever suffered from anxiety, or even if you haven't, maybe you have somebody in your life that you know does, it would be a great book for them to read. I think everybody should read the book. I mean, even if you've never experienced anxiety before, I think it's just a great way to understand where we are in society as a whole. I feel like everybody was suffering from anxiety last year. I feel like I mean, we have yet to see the ramifications of the chaos that ensued last year. I mean, there's going to be a lot of PTSD. I feel like there's going to be a lot of processing, and I'm not trying to sound morbid or anything. I feel like it would be a disservice if we didn't acknowledge the fact that we're still in a pandemic. I mean, we're in LA, we're still in lockdown now. It's end of January. And we are still in this state of not knowing. I feel like we've done our best to stay positive and stay optimistic, but I feel like, that being said, there's a lot of people out there who are going to need some support and are going to need help, and I feel like this book is really going to help a lot of people.
That reminds me, what you said, I 100% agree on. And that reminds me that the proceeds from this book are actually going to two different organizations that are wonderful organizations: Feeding America, which is a collection of food banks around our country, and then the Loveland Foundation, which is therapeutic support for Black and brown women and girls. And weird, a small world story, and then I'll shut up because we do have to go, I imagine. But I reached out to both organizations being like, hey, I'd love to support you in this. What do you think? And both said yes. In the Loveland Foundation, the current executive director was like, oh, and by the way, I read your first book like 8 years ago, and it helped me move out of what I was doing into philanthropy. And now I'm here as the ED at Loveland Foundation. It's like, this is the best small world story I've ever heard. So when people buy the book, hopefully it helps them, but also they're helping these great organizations as well.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work that you've done. I mean, truly, this was too quick for my liking. Anyway, we're definitely going to stay connected. So I'm excited to continue to have conversations with you and continue to get to know you a little bit better. And I am so grateful that you created this book, and your other books, and just all of the work that you've done. I mean, we'll talk about it in the intro, how amazing you are, because truly you are such an incredible human being and blessed for all of the incredible work that you do with so many people. And I look at people like you who do a lot of things behind the scenes that people don't get to experience, and I'm grateful that people like you exist, because this world wouldn't be the same without you. So thank you for all the work that you do. I'm so grateful for the people that are watching this, or if you're listening to this podcast, be sure to share this with your friends or anybody who you think would benefit from listening to this conversation, or reading this book. Before I let you go, where can people go to for more information or to contact you?
Great question. Thank you. Yes, I always forget about these things, but the nice thing about having a name like Lodro Rinzler is that you get to own the domain name. So you can go to like lodrorinsler.com. You type Lodro Rinzler into Instagram, you're going to find me, Facebook, things like that. And I just want to say thank you so much. I mean, what you do with this show is such a service to so many people. And I imagine that you get this all the time from people who are watching or listening, but thank you for doing the work that you do in the world.
No, thank you so much. Before we go, I do have one final question, and I ask all of my guests. It's a great way to like pivot the attention off of me. The question is about this podcast and why I started this podcast. It was the idea that we are all radically loved and radically supported by God, universe, source, whatever higher power of your understanding, that the universe works for us and not against us. So the final question for you is, how do you feel radically loved?
Yeah, I feel it's so funny when you put it that way, because it is that sense of like energy, right? there's a feeling of energy. And for me, it's amazing to know that something like a book like this can go out into the world and help people. And I'm never in relationship with them personally, but that they could still feel the love that I infuse into it. And then sometimes they write me and they say, like, this was actually so beautifully helpful for my heartbreak, my situation, I lost my loved one. And that fuels me beyond anyone's understanding. I can't put it into words. So I'm always appreciative to be in conversation with the people that engage with my work.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a part of the Radically Loved community. We're so grateful, and we look forward to continuing to follow your work and continue to see your growth. And we are so grateful. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching this. Big love.